I never thought I'd see the day someone would stand up to them. But today, something changed. A gang of young punks, swaggering through the aisles like they owned the place, thought they could push around a cashier without consequence. And then, the old man stepped in. His voice, soft but steady, cut through the chaos of the store. Jack Thompson stood behind the register, trying his best to ignore the ruckus, his hands shaking slightly as he scanned items. He wasn't the type to fight back, not in a place like this. His life was about getting by, making sure the customers left happy, never causing trouble. But today, trouble found him. The gang had been harassing him for a while now. At first, it was the usual insults, the taunts that made him shrink a little more into himself. But then it escalated. One of the guys, a tall one with a leather jacket, slapped the counter and pointed at Jack. "Hey, loser, you gonna make us wait all day or what?" The others snickered. Jack didn't respond, keeping his gaze focused on the register. Maybe if he didn't give them attention, they'd get bored. But they didn't. They leaned over the counter, mocking his tired expression. "Look at him, boys, scared of his own shadow." Jack's throat tightened. He was tired. Tired of this job. Tired of being overlooked. He just wanted them to leave him alone. Just as the insults got louder, a voice, low and commanding, interrupted the noise. The old man, standing near the aisles, stepped forward. "That's enough," he said, his voice filled with an authority that seemed out of place in a run-down convenience store. The gang paused, eyeing him curiously. The old man was hunched, his back slightly bent, but his posture was unshakable. His face was weathered, etched with years of life that Jack couldn't even begin to understand. The young man in the leather jacket looked him up and down. "What's this, Grandpa, you gonna tell us what to do now?" The old man didn't flinch. He just stood there, unwavering. For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. Jack looked up, trying to make sense of what was happening. The gang had no idea who they were messing with. The leader of the group took a step toward the old man, ready to show him who was in charge. But something in the old man's eyes made him hesitate. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something far more powerful. "You should go," the old man said, his tone calm but full of weight. The gang leader snorted, "Or what?" Without another word, the old man took one more step forward. The subtle shift in his stance felt like a mountain ready to move. The gang leader, suddenly unsure, looked at his friends. The others, once bold, started shifting uncomfortably. Jack couldn't believe it. The gang, so full of bravado just moments ago, was faltering. "You don't want to mess with him," said one of the guys in the back, his voice suddenly less confident. The old man turned to Jack and nodded, a silent reassurance. "It's okay now." The gang leader took a last look at the old man, his confidence crumbling. Without another word, the group turned and walked out, their footsteps growing fainter as they left. Jack stood there, stunned. The silence in the store was almost deafening. And then, slowly, he looked at the old man. "Thank you." The old man gave a small smile, his eyes twinkling as if he knew something Jack didn't. "Just doing my part." With that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the lingering sense that maybe, just maybe, there was more to the world than what it seemed. I had no idea what had just happened. The store was quiet now, a thick silence hanging in the air where there had been tension moments ago. Jack Thompson stood behind the counter, his hand still trembling slightly as he tried to process what had just transpired. The group of thugs, the ones who had made his life difficult for the past few weeks, had just walked out, quietly, without a fight. The old man, Eli Vance, had stood up to them without raising his voice, without even showing a hint of fear. And just like that, they were gone. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. Was that really how things worked? That one man, this old, frail veteran, had somehow made the entire situation vanish. He had always been the one who backed down, who let people walk all over him, just to keep things calm. But watching Eli, Jack realized there was something else, something far more powerful than just keeping quiet. He wondered who Eli really was. Was he just a normal old man who had a quiet presence, or was there something deeper hidden beneath that calm exterior? As the door to the store swung shut, Jack found himself staring at the empty space where the gang had once stood. The usual sense of dread, the fear of confrontation, was gone. For the first time in a long while, he felt safe. Jack looked over at the counter, seeing the coffee mug that Eli had left behind when he walked out. He hadn't said much, just a few words to reassure Jack, and then he was gone. But those words had made all the difference. It's okay now. Jack found himself thinking about them, repeating them in his mind. It was strange how something so simple could carry so much weight. It wasn't just the gang that had been defeated today. It was something inside Jack himself, something that had always kept him from standing up for himself. The door opened again, and the soft bell rang. Jack snapped out of his thoughts, turning to see who it was. To his surprise, it was Marcus, the man from the gang who had stepped forward to stop his friends. He looked different now, no longer with that cocky attitude. Instead, he had a look of respect in his eyes. Marcus walked up to the counter, his movement slow, measured. "I didn't know who he was, you know," Marcus said, his voice quieter than Jack had ever heard it. "I didn't realize who I was messing with." Jack raised an eyebrow, still trying to piece together the strange events that had unfolded. "What do you mean?" The old man, Marcus continued, glancing back toward the door as if expecting Eli to walk in again. "He's a legend. I should have known. Everyone in the army talks about him, especially the older guys. Eli Vance. He's the real deal." Jack blinked, surprised. "Eli Vance? The name doesn't sound familiar." "He's a hero. He's saved more lives than I can count," Marcus said, his tone laced with awe. The man could have been anyone, but he chose to live quietly, without anyone knowing who he really was. That's why he's respected. Not because of what he's done, but because of who he is. He's the kind of guy who could change the course of a battle with just his presence. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. He had no idea who Eli Vance was, but it was clear now that the man wasn't just any old veteran. There was something deeper to him, something that radiated strength and wisdom. "So, he's not just some old man, huh?" Jack asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No. He's much more than that. And we were lucky today. We all were." Jack nodded, still trying to wrap his mind around everything. The way Eli had carried himself, so calm and unshaken, had completely turned the tables. It made Jack wonder what kind of person he could be if he had just a fraction of that confidence, that quiet strength. As Marcus walked out of the store, Jack turned back to the counter. The quiet that had once been oppressive now felt like a comfort, a moment of peace. He glanced at the door one last time, hoping to see Eli again, but the man was gone. Jack wasn't sure when, but at that moment, he realized he wasn't the same person who had walked into the store earlier. Something inside him had shifted, and he knew it. The world hadn't changed, but the way he saw it, the way he saw himself, had. Maybe he could stand up for himself now. Maybe he could be more than just the guy behind the counter. Maybe, just maybe, he could be someone like Eli Vance. I woke up to the sound of the doorbell ringing again. This time, it wasn't the usual delivery man or a customer. It was Eli. His silhouette framed by the bright morning sun, his figure more solid than I remembered. Jack Thompson had seen a lot in his life, but nothing had prepared him for this next encounter. Eli stood in the doorway, his hands resting on a worn leather bag, his eyes sharp as ever, but there was a different energy about him now. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, his voice low, but this time there was no authority in it, just a quiet invitation. Jack nodded, stepping aside to let the old man in. As Eli walked past, he scanned the store with the kind of attention only a seasoned observer could have. It was as if he was taking inventory of everything in the room, even the smallest details. Jack couldn't help but feel like he was in the presence of someone who had lived through countless storms and had always come out the other side. Eli set the bag down on the counter and pulled up a chair, sitting with the same ease that Jack had come to admire. There was no rush, no urgency in the old man's movements. He was calm, composed, like time had slowed down for him. "You okay, kid?" Eli's voice was gentle but carried a weight of experience that made Jack feel like a child in comparison. "Yeah, I'm good. Just trying to figure out everything that happened," Jack replied, his mind still spinning from the events of yesterday. "It's not every day a guy like you walks in and changes everything." Eli chuckled softly, a warm sound that made Jack feel even more at ease. "You'd be surprised how many times I've walked into a room and things have changed. But, kid, it's not about making a big show of it. It's about knowing when to stand your ground. Knowing when to stay silent and let your present speak for you." Jack sat down across from Eli, the weight of his words settling in. "I don't know how you did it." They were ready to tear the place apart. "They didn't even flinch when they saw me, but when you stepped in." He shook his head, still trying to make sense of it all. "I just stood there," Eli said quietly. "I didn't do anything special. I just let them know I wasn't afraid." Jack leaned forward, his curiosity growing. "So that's it? You just let them know you weren't afraid?" Eli's eyes softened. "Fear is a powerful thing. It can control you if you let it. But when you stop running from it, when you face it head-on, it loses its power." Jack took a deep breath, thinking about the gang from yesterday. They had fed off his fear. Every insult, every threat, had made him shrink further into himself. But Eli was different. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. "I think I understand," Jack said slowly, his voice more confident than he had felt in days. "But how do I start? How do I get to a place where I don't feel scared all the time?" Eli smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling as if he were recalling an old memory. "You don't start by changing who you are. You start by accepting who you are. All the fear, all the doubt, they don't go away overnight. But every time you face them, they get a little weaker." Jack nodded. It wasn't the answer he expected, but somehow, it was the one he needed. "Thanks, Eli. I think I can do that." Eli stood up, his back straightening as if the weight of his years had lifted for just a moment. "You're welcome, kid. Just remember, it's not about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about standing your ground when it counts." As Eli turned to leave, Jack watched him go, his presence still lingering in the room like a steadying force. The bell above the door rang as Eli stepped outside, but this time, it didn't sound like an interruption. It sounded like the start of something new. Jack Thompson stood there for a moment, feeling something shift within him. He wasn't sure what it was yet, but he felt stronger. Maybe it was Eli's words. Maybe it was just the feeling of standing tall after years of shrinking away. But whatever it was, Jack knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to back down anymore. Jack stood by the counter, his hands resting on the register, the quiet hum of the store filling the space around him. It had been a few days since Eli had come in, but something about the old man's words had stuck with him. Stand your ground. It wasn't a complex idea, but it felt like a revelation. Jack had always avoided confrontation, shrinking into the background, but Eli had shown him something different. It wasn't about fighting, it was about owning your space, about not allowing anyone to push you around. The doorbell rang, pulling Jack out of his thoughts. He glanced up to see a familiar face. It was Marcus, the man who had been part of the group of thugs. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to see him again, but here he was, standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus looked around, his eyes scanning the store, before finally meeting Jack's gaze. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said, his voice quieter than before. Jack was taken aback. The last time he had seen Marcus, the guy had been making his life miserable with his gang. Now, standing in front of him, there was no arrogance in his posture. You don't have to apologize, Jack replied, his voice tentative, unsure of how to react. No, I do, Marcus said firmly. You were right, man. The whole thing was ridiculous. I don't know what came over me. I saw you, and I thought you were just some kid, easy to mess with. But you weren't. Jack's mind raced. This wasn't the Marcus he had expected to see. The cocky, disrespectful guy was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely remorseful. Look, Marcus continued, stepping inside, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted to say. I get it now. What Eli did, how he handled everything, that was real. I don't know what it is, but there's something about him. The way he carried himself, it wasn't about being tough or showing off. It was about respect. He earned it just by being who he is. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of Marcus's words. Yeah, Eli's like that, he said softly. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Marcus smiled, a brief flicker of respect crossing his face. I didn't get it before, but I think I'm starting to. Jack looked at Marcus, his mind still processing everything. The shift in the man was undeniable. Marcus wasn't the same guy who had walked in here a few days ago. So, what now? Jack asked, still unsure of what this meant. Well, I came here to make things right, Marcus said, a genuine smile creeping onto his face. I don't want to be that guy anymore. The guy who picks on people because he can. Jack stood there for a moment, letting the words settle in. He hadn't expected any of this. He hadn't expected Marcus to come back and actually apologize, let alone make a real change. You don't have to do anything, Marcus, Jack said, his voice soft but steady. But I think we can start over. Marcus's smile widened. I'd like that. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt like the world was a little less heavy. The encounter had shifted something inside him, just as Eli's words had. Maybe it wasn't about the past or the mistakes they'd made. Maybe it was about moving forward. Jack looked out the window as the sunlight streamed through, casting a warm glow over the store. It felt like a new beginning. Things weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. What mattered was that Jack wasn't the same person he was before. He was stronger now, more aware of his own worth. And for the first time, he felt like he could face whatever came next. Marcus turned to leave, but before he did, he gave Jack a final look. I'll see you around, man. Thanks. Jack nodded, watching him walk out the door. As the bell chimed again, Jack stood in the quiet of the store, a feeling of calm washing over him. Eli had taught him something important, something he would never forget. It wasn't about being big or tough. It was about having the courage to stand tall, even when no one else did. Jack Thompson wasn't just a cashier anymore. He was someone who knew his worth. Jack leaned against the counter, his mind still processing the events of the past few days. It had been a strange, unexpected turn of events, and the weight of Eli's words still hung heavily in the air. For the first time in his life, Jack felt like he was standing on solid ground. The fear that had once controlled him, that constant anxiety that had made him second-guess every action, was slowly starting to fade. It wasn't gone entirely, but it was losing its grip on him. He had learned something important, and now it was up to him to keep it alive. The bell above the door rang again, this time more quietly. Jack looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. It was Eli, walking back into the store, his usual calm demeanor still present, but there was something different in his eyes. He was here for a reason. I thought I'd stop by again, Eli said with a smile, his voice low and steady. You've been doing well, haven't you? Jack nodded, a little surprised by the old man's insight. I think so, he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. It's been a strange few days, but yeah, I think I'm getting the hang of this. Eli sat down at the counter, his presence still as steady and strong as it had been before. Good, he said, his eyes meeting Jack's. You've taken the first step, but there's more to do. Standing your ground isn't just about showing strength when things get tough. It's about knowing when to let go, too. Jack furrowed his brow, unsure of where Eli was going with this. Let go. Yeah, Eli said, nodding slowly. Sometimes, you have to let go of the things that weigh you down. The fear, the doubt, the mistakes. They don't define you unless you let them. It's about forgiveness, Jack. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. Jack swallowed hard. Forgiveness wasn't something he had thought about much. He had spent so much time trying to please others, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't even his own. I don't know if I can do that, Jack admitted quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. It's not easy, Eli said, his voice softening. But it's necessary. You can't move forward if you're still holding on to the past. Jack nodded slowly, his thoughts swirling. He had been holding on to so much, so many moments of fear and doubt. The way the gang had treated him, the way he had always just stood there, letting others push him around. He had to let go of that, to stop carrying it with him. I think I'm starting to understand, Jack said, his voice steady. It's just hard, you know. It is, Eli agreed. But you've already taken the hardest step. You've started standing your ground, and that's the foundation. Now it's time to build on it. Don't let the past hold you back. You're stronger than you think. Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest, a sense of clarity he hadn't had before. It wasn't a sudden shift, but it was a shift nonetheless. Maybe he wasn't the same person he had been when he first started this job. Maybe he had changed in ways he hadn't even realized. Eli stood up, his weathered hand steady as he pushed the chair back. You're going to be all right, Jack. Just keep moving forward. Keep learning. And remember, strength isn't just about what you can do. It's about knowing when to let go and when to hold on. As Eli walked out of the store, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't the same kind of peace he had once longed for, the kind that came from avoiding conflict or hiding from the world. This was a different kind of peace, one that came from understanding himself better, from knowing that he could stand tall in the face of whatever came his way. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have all the answers. But for the first time in his life, he was okay with that. Jack Thompson was ready to move forward. Ready to face the world with a new sense of strength and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly free. It had been a week since Eli had left Jack with his words, and Jack could already feel the subtle shifts in himself. The store was still the same, the customers just as predictable, and the days seemed to stretch on, but something was different. Jack had begun to carry himself differently. It wasn't obvious to anyone else, but he could feel it. The nervousness that had once gripped him when facing a difficult customer or an awkward situation wasn't as tight anymore. He was still the same guy, still a little unsure, but now there was a quiet confidence in him that hadn't been there before. He found himself standing taller, his voice clearer when speaking to people. The small moments of doubt, the ones that had kept him trapped in the background, were slowly fading away. He could still feel the weight of the past, of everything he'd allowed to hold him back, but it was easier to let it go now. Jack had begun to take responsibility for his own life, and with that came a certain freedom. But even as Jack felt this change, life had a way of testing his progress. It came in the form of an unexpected visit. The bell above the door jingled, and Jack looked up to see a familiar face. It was Marcus again, looking a little different. He wasn't the cocky guy Jack had met before. There was no arrogance in his posture this time, no playful attitude. He looked apologetic. Jack's first instinct was to be cautious. After all, Marcus had been part of the group that had harassed him not long ago. But something in the way Marcus walked in, his eyes avoiding Jack's, told him this wasn't going to be the same. "Hey, Jack," Marcus said quietly as he approached the counter. "I know I don't deserve a second chance here, but I need to talk to you." Jack raised an eyebrow, not sure what to expect. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Marcus took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to the floor before meeting Jack's eyes again. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About everything. The way I treated you, the way I acted, it wasn't right. I was just going along with the crowd, trying to fit in, and I know that's not an excuse. Jack stayed silent for a moment, taking in Marcus's words. He had no reason to believe them, not immediately. But something in Marcus's tone made him want to listen. Look, I know I've got a lot to make up for, Marcus continued. But I'm not that guy anymore. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I can't just keep pretending it was okay. Jack could feel the sincerity in Marcus's voice, something that hadn't been there before. He could tell this wasn't the same person who had bullied him. I appreciate that, Jack said, his voice steady. But you've got to understand, it's not just about the apology. It's about showing that you've changed. Marcus nodded, a look of determination on his face. I know. I'm willing to prove it, Jack. I just want to make things right. Jack paused, considering Marcus's words. He had every right to be cautious, but something told him that maybe, just maybe, Marcus was telling the truth. All right, Jack said finally. But you've got a long way to go to make up for what happened. Marcus's face softened with relief, and he smiled. I know. But I'm ready to do whatever it takes. The two stood there for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step forward. And that was something Jack hadn't been sure he'd ever experience with Marcus. As Marcus left the store, Jack watched him go, feeling something shift inside him once more. It was a strange feeling, this idea of letting go of the past and accepting that people could change. Jack wasn't sure if Marcus would follow through, but for the first time, he was willing to give someone a chance. Maybe that was the lesson he'd been learning all along. Not just to stand tall in the face of fear, but to believe that change was possible, even for those who had hurt him. The door closed behind Marcus, and Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The following days felt like a slow transition for Jack, a kind of inner growth that wasn't immediate, but he could feel it every day. The store was still the same, but he wasn't the same. He found himself standing taller, even smiling at customers more often. It wasn't that he was putting on an act, it was just easier now to face the world without feeling like he had to hide. Jack had learned a lot in the past week, not just from Eli but from himself, too. The fears that once controlled him were still there, but they were beginning to feel more like shadows than actual threats. The store, with its familiar smells of coffee and old wood, felt more like a place he belonged now, not just somewhere he had to be. One afternoon, as Jack was restocking the shelves, he saw a figure walking toward the store from the parking lot. It was Eli again. Jack hadn't seen him since their last conversation, and though he wasn't sure what to expect, there was something comforting about the man's presence. "You doing all right?" Eli asked as he entered the store, his voice as steady as ever. Jack paused for a moment, his hands on the cans of soup he was organizing. "Yeah, I think so. It's been a strange few days, but I'm getting through it." Eli gave him a nod, his expression unreadable, but there was a knowing glint in his eyes. "That's good to hear. Progress isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Jack turned to face him fully, a question lingering in his mind. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about standing my ground and letting go. It's not easy. There are still days when it feels like I'm right back where I started." Eli nodded, his gaze never leaving Jack. "It's okay to feel that way. Progress isn't a straight line. Some days you'll feel like you're winning, and other days it'll feel like you've taken a step back. The key is to keep moving forward, even when it feels hard." Jack couldn't help but think about Marcus, the way he had returned to apologize, and how much that moment had shifted something inside him. And what about people who've messed up? I mean, like Marcus. He came back to apologize, but I still don't know if I should just forgive him and move on. It's not that simple, right? Eli gave him a thoughtful look, and for a moment, Jack thought the old man might not answer. But then, Eli spoke, his voice as steady as ever. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing what happened. It's about letting go of the weight that's holding you down. You don't forgive someone for their sake. You forgive for yours. Jack took a moment to absorb that, the word settling into him like a missing piece falling into place. So, if I forgive Marcus, it's not about him. It's about me. Eli's eyes softened. Exactly. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to forget or even accept what happened. It just means you're not letting it control you anymore. You're letting yourself be free of the past. Jack nodded slowly, feeling the weight of Eli's words. I think I get it now. It's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about freeing yourself from the things that have been holding you back. That's right, Eli said, his voice warm, but with an edge of finality. You can't move forward if you're still chained to the past. And that includes how you handle your relationships with others. Sometimes you have to let go of what hurt you, not for their sake, but for yours. Jack felt something click inside him. It was a quiet realization, but it was enough to shift his perspective. The store felt a little different now, like it was no longer just a place to work. It had become a place of growth, a place where he could truly stand tall, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Eli patted him on the shoulder, a rare moment of contact that felt like a kind of affirmation. You're on the right path, Jack. Keep going. You've got this. As Eli turned and left the store, Jack watched him go, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time, he felt like he was in control of his own life, like he could move forward without the weight of fear and doubt holding him back. He wasn't perfect, but he was getting there. And that was enough. Jack had started to settle into a rhythm in the days that followed. The routine of the store was comforting now, but something had changed within him that made even the most ordinary moments feel different. It wasn't just about standing taller anymore. It was about something deeper, a sense of peace he hadn't known he was missing. As he wiped down the counter one afternoon, Jack caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the glass door. His posture was different, straighter. His expression, once tense and wary, was now more relaxed, more at ease. He realized he wasn't just pretending to be okay anymore, he actually felt okay. He had Eli to thank for that. The lessons weren't just about standing your ground. They were about learning to let go, to forgive, and to be okay with who you were. It was a slow process, but it was working. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Jack from his thoughts. He glanced up and saw Marcus walking in again. This time, there was no hesitation in Marcus's step. The usual nervousness, the uncertainty that had been there before, was gone. Hey, Jack, Marcus said, his voice confident but warm. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About moving forward. Jack looked up, surprised but intrigued. What's on your mind? Marcus leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Well, I've been taking it slow, you know? Really thinking about things, how I treated people. How I treated you. Jack nodded, sensing the sincerity in Marcus's words. I get it now. I wasn't in a good place back then. I was angry, and I took it out on everyone around me. But I've started working on it. I've been going to therapy, trying to make sense of all the stuff I buried. It's not easy, but I want to be better. Jack felt a strange sense of pride for Marcus. It wasn't just that Marcus was admitting he was wrong, it was that he was actively trying to change. Jack knew how hard that was. That's a big step, Jack said, his voice calm but supportive. It's not easy, but you're doing it. And that's what matters. Marcus smiled, a genuine, grateful smile. Thanks. It means a lot to hear that. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to be better, you know? I'm not the same guy I was. Jack could tell. There was a change in Marcus, a subtle one, but it was there. I can see that, Jack said, his voice steady. And I think that's the first step, admitting there's work to be done. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward. Marcus nodded, looking down for a moment. I still have a lot of work to do, but I'm not running anymore. I'm staying with it. And if you're willing, I'd like to make it right with you. All that stuff from before. I'm sorry. Jack looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, he saw Marcus as someone trying to be better, not someone who was stuck in the past. I accept your apology, Jack said, his voice steady but sincere. And I think you're on the right path. Marcus gave him a small nod, his expression grateful. Thanks, Jack. I don't take that lightly. As Marcus turned to leave, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. He hadn't expected this kind of resolution, but somehow it felt right. It was a reminder that people could change, that redemption wasn't just something for the movies, it could happen in real life, too. Jack stood there for a moment, thinking about everything that had led him here. He wasn't just the cashier anymore, hiding behind the counter, hoping no one would notice him. He was someone who had learned to stand tall, not just physically, but emotionally. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest lesson of all. Jack had come a long way. He still had his doubts, his fears, but they didn't control him anymore. He was in charge now. And for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with that. As the door closed behind Marcus, Jack took a deep breath and went back to his work, his hand steady, his heart lighter than it had ever been. Jack had spent the past few weeks adjusting to the changes in his life. It wasn't always easy, but every day felt like another step forward. The store had become a place where he no longer felt invisible. He was present, grounded, and even began to feel some of the old doubts and fears fade away. He had learned from Eli that strength wasn't just about standing tall in the face of adversity. It was also about the quiet moments when you allowed yourself to heal, to forgive, and to move on. One Saturday afternoon, as Jack was wiping down the counter, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. Jack, you in here? It was Marcus again. The guy had become a regular at the store, but this time, his presence wasn't the same. There was no uncertainty or apology in his voice, just a calm, steady confidence. Jack looked up, a small smile forming on his face. Yeah, I'm here. Come on in. Marcus walked up to the counter, this time without hesitation. I've been thinking, Marcus said, leaning casually against the counter, about what you said a while back. About not running from the past, about making things right. I've been trying to do that. Jack nodded, noticing how different Marcus seemed now. There was a maturity in his demeanor, a clarity in his eyes. And how's that going? Jack asked, genuinely curious. Marcus smiled. It's been tough, but it's been worth it. I've been talking to people I've hurt, trying to fix things. And you know what? It's actually starting to feel right. Jack felt a flicker of pride for Marcus. This wasn't the same guy who had come in and tried to intimidate him. This was someone who was genuinely trying to make amends. I'm glad to hear that, Jack said. It's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. Marcus paused for a moment, his expression softening. You know, I never really understood what it meant to stand your ground until I saw you. I was always running from things, trying to avoid the tough stuff. But watching you, hearing what Eli said, it clicked. I don't have to keep running. I can face things, deal with them, and move on. Jack felt something stir inside him. Marcus wasn't just talking about himself anymore. He was talking about something deeper, something Jack had learned himself. It's not about avoiding the hard stuff, Jack agreed, it's about facing it and learning from it. Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Exactly. And I'm starting to think maybe I can do that now. Maybe I can finally move forward without being stuck in the past. Jack looked at Marcus. His expression thoughtful. I think you're already doing it. The two of them stood in the quiet of the store, the world outside moving on, but in that moment, it felt like time had slowed down. They weren't just two people in a store anymore. They were two people who had learned, and were still learning, how to live with the past without letting it control them. Marcus glanced at the door and then back at Jack. "I'll let you get back to work," he said, his voice lighter than before. "But I'll see you around. I just wanted to say thanks. You've helped more than you know." Jack smiled as Marcus walked out of the store, the door closing softly behind him. As the bell chimed, Jack stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. It wasn't just about standing tall. It was about being able to look at yourself and know you were doing the best you could. And for the first time, Jack felt like he was finally doing that. The door opened again, and this time, it wasn't Marcus. But for Jack, it didn't matter. He was ready for whatever came next, because he knew he had the strength to handle it. And that was enough.